My father and my mother are the same age, so he was also 17, and he was also in the Lodz Ghetto. His story is a little bit more tragic in the sense that my mother in the ghetto had her parents with her and her sister, so they were a family unit. My father's father, basically, the men, when the Germans marched in, the men ran away. They tried to get into Russia, but there were apparently masses of people trying to get into Russia. My father's father decided he was going to go back and face the music, and not why he did it, I don't know. But so he went back. My father eventually also went back, and they arrested because he'd been a city councilor for the Bundes Party. He was arrested almost immediately, and taken off to prison and tortured, and eventually marched out and shot. So my father would have been about 17, yeah, maybe even younger, 16, when that happened. And he wrote his father, I mean, I know this because he wrote his father's obituary, and they, and the family just basically camped out around the prison, trying to get food to the prisoners. And then my father was told after the war what had happened in that prison. But so the father was taken away in the late 1939 and was shot. So that left my father, his younger brother, and their mother alone in the ghetto. My father had an elder sister, but she had gone away to Warsaw. So they didn't know what happened to her. But eventually, my father and my mother continued, they were dating, so they continued that relationship. My mother was always, would bring him, if she had extra bread, she would bring him, they would share it. In the end, when word got around that the Germans were going to liquidate the ghetto, my father, his younger brother, and their mother went over. It was actually Shayevich decided that my grandparents' apartment, there was 2 rooms, which was pretty unusual, that they could block it off and make it look like there was nothing there, and that they would all hide in the room that was blocked off. So there were, so it was 4 people in my mother's family, 3 people in my father's family, my mother's friend Zhenya and her stepmother, and Shayevich. So 10 people in a tiny room. They couldn't make any noise. And they hid out. The first few times they actually fooled the Germans. But the third time, one of the Germans, when they were leaving, realized that from the wall that there was more room than what they had seen when they'd entered the front room. So they went back and moved they had a dresser, and moved the dresser, and there they found them all, and that's how they all were sent to Auschwitz. So at Auschwitz, the men were separated from the women, so my father and his brother and their mother was sent to the gas chamber at Auschwitz. So the 2 brothers were sent to Dachau, and with my grandfather, with my mother's father. And then towards the end of the war, they were all on, the Germans put the Jews on trains going further and further into Germany to sort of hide. So they were on a train like that. My father, his brother, and my grandfather, my mother's father. And the Allies bombed the train. And so my father and his brother, they were young guys. They just ran out of the train. But and they sat on my uncle told me they sat on an embankment waiting and waiting for my grandfather to come. And he never came. And then when it got to be night, they decided they couldn't wait any longer. And they wandered off. My grandfather must have been killed on the train because he never came out. But my father and his brother wandered off until they heard people speaking English. And then they realized they must have been Americans. And so they ran up to them. And my father taught himself English in the ghetto. And he was never shy about showing off his language. So that's how they survived. But then my mother had been taken to, and her mother and my aunt had all been taken to Bergen-Belson and Genya also. And they were liberated by the British at Bergen-Belsen. And then my father, everybody was, after the war, everyone was looking for everyone else. And my mother and her sister went off just hitchhiking around Germany looking for their father. In the meantime, my father arrived in Bergen-Belsen DP camp looking for her and found my grandmother who had survived the war. And so he waited there until they came back, and that's how they were reunited.